Today's daf is Mem Vav, but if you look on Mem Hey Amud Bet, there's 3 lines. And it seems likely that we should probably read those 3 lines. So we're doing a daf and a half today. Just like that. But I'm going to stall a little bit. You're going to undo, choose, no, uncheck one. Okay. So I'm going to get started, and I'll stall a little bit until hopefully Hanan joins, because I don't want him to miss the beginning, because then he'll miss the end too. But the concept of our perfect timing. So the fundamental concept that our Mishnah Hanan on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, we're going to do the Mishnah on Mem Hey Amud Bet, because that's where it starts. So here's the big challenge that our parak, at least this beginning part of our parak, deals with. It's one of the most exciting topics in all of Gemara. That's the intro. The Ran has a lot to say, as you can tell, which makes the daf very short. And the question is something we call breira. So we've come across this concept many times already, but I think one of the easiest ways to explain it, among many complicated ways, is the question we had. So breira literally means choice, I think, right? But it actually not really. It means clarity, I think, might be a better translation. Huvrar hadavar, the issue became clear. And where we had this question before, one of the examples was in Masechet Eruvin. If you recall, in Eruv, you can choose to travel 2,000 amot outside of your city. But you can imagine there'd be a problem if you lived in a small town and you heard that there was going to be a guest speaker coming to a neighborhood, but you didn't hear the whole message in shul, right? It got garbled. And you couldn't tell whether the guest speaker was coming to the town to your left or the town to your right. And you're stuck, right? Your WhatsApp doesn't work back in those days. So, am I frozen? No. Am I frozen? I'm okay, right? Okay. So what you do is the following. The Gemara in Eruvin, the Mishnah Eruvin, talked about a case where you decided that you're going to set up 2 Eruvin, one on the west of the city and one on the east of the city. If your Eruv is to the west, you can travel 2,000 amot that direction. If your Eruv is to the east, you can travel 2,000 amot in that direction. But you don't know which one you can do, and you obviously can't do both. So what you do is you set up 2 Eruvs before Shabbos, and you say, if it turns out that Rabbi so-and-so came to speak to the town to the left, to the west, I want my Eruv to be there. And if he came to the other town, I want my Eruv to be there. You wake up the next morning, you go to shul, and someone tells you where the Rebbe showed up. And then you can walk that afternoon to go visit him or her, right? So that's called breira, because of course your Eruv has to start when Shabbat starts, right? Your Eruv is where you live when Shabbat starts. You had no idea where it was going to be, but you made a condition, and later you found out that you really wanted to go to the west. So it turns out that retroactively, when Shabbat started, your Eruv to the west is a good Eruv, and your Eruv to the east was not a good Eruv. Now, there's a machlok about whether you can do that or whether you say that's ridiculous, right? You've got to make a commitment. And if you didn't commit, you didn't commit. You can't commit to 2 things. That's one concept of breira. The other concept, many
and there are rabbis who actually say that that's ridiculous.
Correct. There's a machlok about pre-Ishmael.
Yeah.
There are many other nuances. Another very classic example where we had this in the Masechet Beitza. There's another example, which I'm sure Charlie's very happy with in Masechet Shkalim, right, where achim shutfim, brothers who are also partners, if they're chayav in a kalbon, they're patur maser behema. Remember, it's a Mishnah maser behema, I guess. Also, it's both places, right? In any event, another case we had in Beitza was where you're about ready to have Shabbos, and you remember that your beautiful barrel of wine that you're planning on serving to your 50 wedding guests who are waiting has not had truma taken off from it, and you can't take truma on Shabbat. So what you say is, and you're not there, let's say, right? You say the minute before candlelighting, I want 1 portion or 2% of this wine should be truma, and I'll take it after Shabbat. According to one Tana, it's Machloket Tanaim, one Tana, if you hold a breira, you can drink all the wine that Shabbat, except leave 2% at the bottom, give it to the Kohen after Shabbos. It turns out that's the part that was truma. Of course, there's no way to know in a barrel of wine which part you were referring to, right? It's indistinguishable. According to the other Tana, you can't do that because there's basically truma and chulin mixed together, right? Because you can't distinguish. So this is a question of breira. Why is it relevant to our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah comes up with the next case in the saga of Nedarim. You have two people who are partners, and they're called hashutfim. That's the first word. I'm starting from the top of Mem Hey Amabet, because there's no reason not to. You have partners, and these partners together own, let's say, a courtyard, right? They own a yard. And of course, as happens often in partnerships, they get angry with each other. And Reuven says to Shimon, I don't want you getting any hana from anything I own. And makes a neder. It's konim. Everything that I own is prohibited to you like a karban. And Shimon says the same thing to Reuven. Everything I own is prohibited to you like a karban. The problem is that they have a joint ownership of a field, right? Can Reuven or Shimon walk into this field? Now, Ron understands that we're talking about walking into a field, which is a thing that is usually not giving anyone hana, right? You don't pay for that, but you do benefit from it. So I shouldn't say you don't get hana, but you don't pay for it. It's what we called earlier, things that were given away for free, basically, vitor, right? So let's say that's prohibited. So says the Mishnah, shutfim shenadru hana zeh mizeh, two partners who swear to each other that I'm not going to let you get any hana from anything I own, asurin likanes lechatzer. They're not allowed to walk into the field that they own together, because since they own the field together and each one is prohibited in hana from the other, you're not allowed to go into that field. Welcome, Hanan. It's good to see you. So we are on top of Daf Mem Hey Amud Bet, also in the middle of Daf Mem Hey Amud Bet at the same time, where these partners who are not brothers, they're partners. They say they're not going to get hana from each other. They cannot go into the field. The reason being that even though each one's, in theory, owns a portion of doesn't own a portion, but gets a portion of the field, you can't determine exactly which portion each one gets before. The Chachamim hold, this is what Ravina says in Masechet Bava Kama, the Chachamim hold there's no breira, and therefore you can't go into the field because you don't know which part is yours and which part is the partner's. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov says, no, zeh nichnas l'toch shelo, zeh nichnas l'toch shelo. Either one can go in and say, this is my portion, right? And I wherever I walk is mine, wherever you walk is yours, and therefore you're allowed to go into the field. According to Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, the simplest explanation is that he holds that there is breira, and that basically I own this part of the field, and you own that part of the field. The Ran, just to give you a reference here, has a long discussion, as you can imagine, from the page. And one of the details he points out is that the breira of partnership is not a breira necessarily in space. It's a breira in time, which gets very confusing. Meaning, if two people go in and they own a field together, they're not splitting the field 50-50, but they're splitting the usage of the field 50-50. So it could be that partner A gets it on Tuesday and partner B gets it on Wednesday, right? Now, you don't write that down necessarily, but it turns out after the fact that if A used it on Tuesday, that was his day. And if B used it on Wednesday, that was his day. So it turns out that on that day, it was entirely owned by the one who was not asur b'hana'ah.
Isn't Brera in this situation, it's just contractual, so to speak. I mean, legalistic Brera, because it's not, there's no shared space, time. It's just theoretical. If you and I both buy something together, it's not like, and we buy a car. It's not like I have the front of the car and you have the back of the car, or something like that. You can't divide it up, nor can you say, I have it on Monday and Tuesday, you have it. I mean, you own your apartment with your wife or something like that, right? It's not like you have certain rooms that you own. And
let's leave the wife out for the conversation, but this is exactly the question. What you're saying is not so clear. So there's one possible way of looking at it, that if we buy a car together, assuming we can't both use it at the same time, right? Only one person can drive the car. Then the agreement is that we own it together, but it turns out we're not making a contract that I own it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you own it the other day.
Right.
But it turns out the brera is that if I use it on Tuesday, that's a day that I own it. Meaning, so here's the point, Hanan. If
when
I
you're
own
using
a car,
it, you own it.
Right. So if I own a car, you can't walk over to me and say your car is prohibited on you. You don't own it. Right? You have no right on my thing. But if you own it, you can. And so that's the question is, do you own this car or not own this car? If you hold yesh brera, then you basically hold that when you use the car, you're the only owner. If you hold ein brera, no brera, then basically it's just a contract. It's an agreement that we can each use it, even though we both own it.
But
in
why
which
can't
case,
usage determine? I mean, if I use it,
No,
I still own half.
so the Ron makes an interesting point. Again, I can't say the whole Ron. That the Ron makes a very interesting point. If you have a debt to someone, a shibud to someone, you can make a neder against that. Meaning, let's say I rent you my car, okay, and you pay me $1,000 to rent my car for a month, and then I get angry at you tomorrow and I say my car should be like a karban to you. The car is prohibited from you. You can't use the car anymore,
Right.
even though I own the car and you paid me for it.
Yes.
This is a machloket Rishonim, by the way, but the Ran is of this opinion
Yeah.
that's because there's a shibud, there's what's called a responsibility that's agreed upon,
Right.
but that the neder is more powerful than the shibud.
Yeah. You probably still have to reimburse me. I could
Of
sue
course,
you.
right? No, for sure, you'll take me to court. I'll have to pay you back, no question. So anyway, so that's really the question: is do you view a partnership as being a shibud, a responsibility, or real ownership that on Tuesday it's owned by the guy who's driving it? You have a question, James?
I just wanted to clarify, in your case, Kanan, if you're the one driving it, you get in an accident, you're not going to walk.
I'm completely responsible.
Well, that
Well,
might be the machloket.
Why would you be completely responsible? You only own half.
Because I was
At the time, you were the 100% owner. That's exactly the argument.
no, but you know what? Let's say I don't have any money. You could probably sue the co-owner.
Okay, well, that's so let's keep going. Obviously, let me just point out, Hanan, to also address, I think James' point is very good. If there's a contractual understanding that we're partners, but partners means this, right? We're going to have a little debate in a little bit, which just raises one more point, which is let's say me and Nava are partners in a field, right? Am I allowed to give my right to somebody else, right? So there's going to be a question later.
It's a lease thing.
So you can't,
Sublease.
right? Can I sublease? Exactly. The assumption is that you can't in our Gemara, that Ruvain and Shimon have a stake. Ruvain can't say, I'm giving my stake to Levi. We'll see that case in the
Not
Mishnah.
without the consent of the other one.
Correct. Or if you put in the deal. Okay, so let's keep reading the Mishnah. So that's the case. We're at the top line of Memvav. However, they're both prohibited to do something in the field that is not allowed without permission of your partner. We have a rule in Bava Basra, which we'll get to eventually, hope, that if you own a field with someone else, you're not allowed to do things in the field that are very big nuisance, that they either take away the whole field or they ruin the property. So these are things you're not allowed to do if you're asur b'hana'ah, like setting up a mechaim. Yeah, an oven's a tanur, but mechaim is a millstone, right, a grinding place, and to raise chickens, which of course always cause a lot of trouble. Now, what if not both? What if one of the partners? Let's say there's two partners, Ruvain and Shimon, they own a field together, and Ruvain is prohibited from getting any hana'ah from Shimon, then he can't walk into the field. He can ace the chatzer. Now, it doesn't seem to add very much. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Omer Yachohu Lomar Lo, he can say, I'm happy to walk, I can walk into the field. That doesn't add anything. Why are we bringing this case? I'm sorry, I'm not going into your field. We're bringing the case for the next words. The words are the kofin et hanoder limkar tchalko. We force the person who had the neder to sell their portion, because since Ruvain is not allowed to walk into the field and Shimon is allowed to walk into the field, we're afraid that Ruvain's going to watch Shimon going into the field and having a great time, and he's going to want to do the same thing. He's not allowed to do the same thing, and therefore we force him to sell his portion so that he doesn't come to a situation where he walks into the field. So now we don't do that in the first case, because obviously when you hate someone, as long as they're getting it as bad as you don't feel so bad, right? It's only when there's an imbalance in misery, right? So when Reuven and Shimon are both prohibited in the field, we're not worried either one's going to walk onto it. But if Reuven and Shimon are partners, but only Shimon gets to drive the car, then we're afraid Reuven's going to come to drive the car, and therefore we make him sell his portion in the partnership. So that's the chiddush of this part of the Mishnah. Haya, third case, we're 6 lines from the top. Let's say this case, right? So there's a third party. Reuven and Shimon own a field together. Levi really got Reuven angry, and Reuven said to Levi, everything I own is asur to you like a koni, like a korban. So can Levi walk into the field and say, well, I'm going on to Shimon's portion, right? So again, the Tanakama says, lo yikanes the chatzer, because we don't know what's Shimon's and we don't know what's Reuven's. You can't walk into the field, into the courtyard. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, no, again, Yachal lomar lo l'toch shel chavercha ani nichnas. I'm going into Shimon's portion, who likes me. Ve'eno nichnas l'toch shelcha. I'm not going into your portion. And this is where the Ran quotes the Rashba, who said what I told you earlier, that this is not saying that Levi can go into Shimon's portion anytime he wants. It's if Levi's going into Shimon's portion to do work for Shimon, right? So Shimon owns a field, he's allowed to let Levi do his work in the field, but he's not allowed to sublet it on, Airbnb and just sell his portion in the field. That's not an understanding in the condition of partners. So the Rashba discusses that, the Ran quotes it over here, among others. So that's the third case in the Mishnah. The fourth case in the Mishnah, which actually the Ran doesn't have until later, but we're going to read it because we have it, is that, let's say, a whole separate case. You're mudar hana'am mechavero. You go, again, you're mudar, you're asur from benefit from somebody else. So Ruvain is and Shimon are in a fight, and Shimon, either because Ruvain assured him or because Shimon assured himself, says, I never want anything that you own is prohibited on me like a karban. And it turns out that was a big mistake, because Ruvain happens to own the nicest spa in town, right? He owns the swimming pool. So Yeshlo Merchatz, he's got a good bathhouse, or Beit Abad, or he's got a Beit Abad, a pressing floor, right? Where you press olives is Beit Abad. So I got my olives. I need to go find a mill house, right? And it's only owned. The only one I could find in town is owned by Ruvain. And I said I can't get any enough from Ruvain. However, fortunately for Shimon, muskarim, they are rented out a year in the city. So we understand that if Ruvain owns the bathhouse, obviously Shimon cannot go. But Ruvain owns the bathhouse, but he rented it out. It's a chain bathhouse, right? And it's leased out by, again, it's an interesting point, because we shouldn't discuss all these questions about a franchise and a lease and like you know what I mean? Like, what's the nuances of all of this? But the bottom line is that it's owned by Ruvain, but Ruvain is not managing it. Ruvain leased out the bathhouse. It's under new management, but Ruvain's the owner, right? So can Shimon go and enjoy himself in that bathhouse, or grind his, or whatever, I mean, call it olives, press his olives in the Beit Abad? So says the Mishnah, it depends. Im yesh lo b'en tfisat yad, if Ruvain, or the one who's usher, right, maintains a whole handle, a tfisat yad, like an interest, I guess is how you would say, right, in legal terms, a portion of the profits, we'll see what that means in the Gemara, then it's asur. Because even though it's under different management, if Ruvain's getting 20% of the profit, then Shimon going to the Beit Abad will make Ruvain benefit, right? Or he'll be benefiting from Ruvain. But ein lo behen tfisat yad, if Ruvain gets no benefit from it, then it would be mutar. So that's that case. And again, the Gemara is going to discuss how you define a tfisat yad. The final case in our Mishnah is one that we had earlier, which is, again, a whole different topic, and the Ran has it separately, which is, let's say a person is Omer lechaviro. Ruvain says to Shimon, Konem lebeitcha shani nichnas. I and you, we're never going to be friends. I'm never going to go into your house. Your house is like, to me, is like a karban, right? Or sadcha shani lokech. I will never purchase your field. Then Ruvain does. So the house is the same house, the field is the same field, but the owner is not there anymore. In that case, mate, well, either Ruvain dies, or he sells the house, or he sells the field, then mutar. Then Shimon can go into it, because Shimon only is angry at Ruvain. He said your house, not the house, right? So therefore, it has new ownership. He can go into it. Again, the Rishonim point out, and this is a Gemara we had earlier, that Ruvain cannot sell it to Shimon. Remember, right? So although Ruvain can sell it to Levi, and then Shimon can buy it from Levi, Ruvain is not allowed to sell it directly to Shimon. If you recall, we had the case earlier this week where there has to be an intermediary. We discussed that a lot about the food.
What if the guy who died, it's his sons now who are owning it?
Doesn't matter. We'll have that case later, to be also honest, but that doesn't.
It's personal, in other words.
It's personal, correct? Because it's your house, he said, right? He said your house. But if you say Konem bayit zeh shani nechnas, I swear I'm never going to go into this house. I hate the architecture here. I'm never walking into this house. Or sadeh zu shani lokech, I'm never going to buy this field. Then if mate o shemachru la'acher asur. If the owner dies or he sells it, then it remains prohibited, because Shimon assered the house, not the house owned by Ruvain, and therefore it remains prohibited forever. Okay. Interestingly, and just to point it out, the Gemara will discuss this. If the house falls down, right, and Ruvain rebuilds it, then in the first case, it would probably remain usher because it's still Reuven's house. It's not so clear how much has to remain. But in the second case, it might remain mutar because he only prohibited the house, not a replacement house. So there's nuance there as well. The Gemara will discuss that. Now, ask the Gemara, going back to our first case, again, remember this is
He built an extension to the house, you know, where it wasn't there. I could just.
They're good questions. You could see it gets very technical.
Yeah.
So don't make Nedarim is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Now, ask the Gemara, let's say in our Mishnah, now let's go back to our original Mishnah, right? The case was Reuven and Shimon are partners in a field, and Reuven is prohibited on Shimon's field, Shimon is prohibited on Reuven's field. The Mishnah said, Tanakama says they're usher to go into the field. Moshe ben Yaakov says, no, each one goes into it and says it's my portion. Okay. The question that the Gemara wants to address is what happened? Did Reuven say, I'm so angry with you, Shimon, I'm never going into your field, or I'm never getting benefit for anything you own? And Shimon said the same thing to Reuven. Or did Shimon get angry at Reuven and say, I don't want you to use my stuff? Why does it matter? So ask the Gemara Boiler, is it binidro pligi where they made the netter, meaning Reuven said, I don't want to get benefit from you, Shimon. And Shimon said, I don't want to get benefit from you, Reuven. And perhaps the reason the Chachamim say you can't go into the field is not because there's no breira. Perhaps everyone agrees that there is breira. But the reason is the Chachamim say that this is just bad business, right? If you own something with someone else, don't start prohibiting yourself from going into their field, from getting benefit from them, because you might overstep. You might stay too long. You might do something inappropriate. So it's a knas, basically. It's a punishment for being an idiot, right? For being a fool by making a netter with someone you're doing business with, basically. Aval, sorry, the nidrog pligi, that hidirod zed zemai. What if the other people made the netter? Mi amrinan, the benidrohu de pligi, they only argue if the person themselves made the netter, so we're angry with them or we're going to punish him. Aval bahadirod zed zem, moduli rabban, Rabbi ben Yaakov. Maybe if the other party made the netter against you, then the Rabbanan would agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that you're allowed to walk into the field. It's like you're forced. I didn't choose to prohibit myself from the guy. He got angry at me. He made a netter prohibiting his field on me. So I can't control that. And basically, I still own my portion in the partnership. So he can't take that away from me. And so maybe they would agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Odilma, or perhaps they argue in that case too. Afilo behedirod zed zed pligi Rabbanan. So that was the question. Do the Rabbanan argue? And the way the Ran understands this is do the Rabbanan argue about the concept of breira or not? Right? Do you say that basically this field is a mishmash of both of us, and therefore, if your part's prohibited, I can't go into any of it, which is the way I explained the Mishnah? Or is it in fact everyone agrees with the Elazar ben Yaakov that as partners, each one of us ultimately owns part of the field, and you can't prohibit my ownership on me. So Shimon can't get rid of Reuven's ownership, but there's a knas in this case because it still is unseemly for you to be usher b'hana'ah and then go into the field. So that's the question. Tashma. Well, let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. The second case in our Mishnah said, Haya echad mehem mudar hana'ah mechavero. If one of them is prohibited in mudar hana'ah, sounds like the other one prohibited him. And the Rabbanan still argue, pligi Rabbanan. So even though it sounds like you didn't make the netter yourself, someone else made the netter about you, Shimon got really angry at Reuven and said, you're asur b'hana'ah, you're still asur to go in the field. Says, well, mudar doesn't always mean that. You could just change the language. You can read it, nadur mechavero hana'ah, right? That he made the netter. So he's the one who did the act. And says that actually makes a lot more sense. Because remember, the Mishnah then said, the Katani Seifa, you force him to sell his portion in the partnership. Now, right, if Shimon came to Reuven and said, never walk into my property, you can't then say Reuven's not allowed to go into the field and he's got to sell his property. That's not fair to Reuven, right? He didn't make the netter. Shimon made the netter. How could Shimon prohibit Reuven on his own property and make him sell it? So it must be the case is where Reuven himself said, I will never get benefit from Shimon. And so the Chachamim say, so therefore you can't go into the field. And because you're such a fool and you made this netter, and we're afraid that if we don't change things, you're going to come to be over the netter, you have to sell your property, right? So that makes more sense. So therefore, the neder who, that the person who's usher made the neder, then you can hainu kofin. Therefore, you can say you force him. Eliyamr to adre, if you say the netter was made to him, meaning by the other party, Amai kofinoto. How can you force him to sell it? Hamenas anis. He's forced. He was against his will put into this situation. So it must be, in fact, that is the machloket in that case. Well, it must be that it doesn't prove it to us. Sorry. So the machloket is not necessarily in one case or the other. We have not proven it from this part of the Gemara. The Ran points out here, I'll take 2 more minutes, maybe not too much, that the Yerushalmi, which the Rambam Paskins like, understands our Mishnah completely the opposite. That when we say kofin, is that in fact you force the one who made the neder to sell, right? So that basically, if Shimon said to Ruvain, right, I don't want you to get any benefit from me. Ruvain's not allowed to go into the field, but we force Shimon to sell the field, right? And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because since Shimon prohibited Ruvain on it, Ruvain can't go in, but Shimon can't allow that situation to persist. And there's a knas, basically, we force Shimon to sell the field. But clearly that's not how our Gemara's understand it. Amar Rabba,
Like the whole thing or just his
portion. No, he's got to sell his portion. Amar Rabba Amar Ziri. Says Rabba, says Ziri, machloket, top word now, excuse me, is I forgot the words, what's the box thing? Kishayesh. Kishayesh ba kedei chaluka. Says Rabba in the name of Ziri, a very, very interesting point, that the only time that they argue about whether, again, this field that partners own together is viewed as being combined ownership, basically, in which case I can prohibit you on my portion, or separate ownership that is just difficult to disentangle, which is what we call brera, is if the field is big enough to be split, meaning it's more than 8 amot, because remember, when you split something, each person has to get 4 amot. So it has to be a big enough space. But if it's a tiny space, meaning it's too small to split up, right? Then divrei hakol mutar. Then everybody agrees that it would be permitted, which sounds pretty radical, right? Even the Chachamim would agree that when Shimon says to Ruvain, you can't get any hana from me, and Ruvain says to Shimon, you can't get any hana from me, the fact is that because they own such a small field, it's impossible to disentangle their ownership. This is my understanding. Now, the Ran doesn't say exactly these words, but it's impossible to disentangle their ownership. And therefore, each one is an owner on each portion of the field, and I'm not allowed to prohibit someone else from their from ownership in their thing. It's almost like me walking into your house and saying, your house is usher to you, it's konem. It's only where the field is big enough for there to be 2 portions that according to the Chachamim, you can say, look, we know there are 2 portions. We know one sort of belongs to one partner, one belongs to the other partner. We just can't disentangle which one is which. And so when Ruvain says to Shimon, you're prohibited on my property, you're prohibited on part of it. And it's a real isser. We just don't know which part. And so therefore you can't walk on it. But if it's too small for even that, you can't prohibit them because you're basically taking away their entire ownership. So therefore, divrei hakol mutar.
It doesn't make sense. Why the size of the field should matter? Because
if it's dependent on brera, then the whole machloket is based on the fact that we believe that there is an identity of each of the partners in the field. We just, can we or can we not?
The Chachamim don't hold a brera.
Correct, but even if they don't hold a brera, if it means that they hold that we can't clarify. So ein brera means, it's like if you have the container of water, right, of oil, and some of it is truma and some of it is not truma. So we know it's not all truma. You didn't make the whole container truma, but you can't tell which part is truma and which part is not truma. So you can't drink any of it, right? But there's no question that it's not all truma. So the same thing is true here. Your partners, one of you owns a portion of the field, one of you owns another portion. There's just no way, if you hold ein brera, which is what we're saying, to know which portion is which one. So every step of Ruvain might be on Shimon's property.
But it's different with partnerships. I mean, than the bottle of barrel.
It is different, but they're applying the same concept. It is definitely different. So I'll just make one point here, which is really why the Ran is so long, is that we're about to say in our Gemara that the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, that there is brera.
I mean, because that would imply that if I had a really big field that I owned with a partner, I could sell half the field without his consent. Because we could figure out, we could say,
there's 2 issues here. There's ownership and there's responsibility. There's shibud, what we call shibud, right? Which is each partner is viewed as owning half the field, but each partner is also viewed as having responsibility to the other partner not to do something to ruin their agreement. the neder can be more powerful than that second thing, right? A neder can take away from shibud the same way it can take away from a rental, but it can't take away from the first thing. You can't have a neder that overcomes ownership. So, and just to be clear, when the Chachamim say you can't walk on the field, it's a takana because we just don't know. It's not because we know for sure you can't. It's just that even if the field is 10 acres, the step I take might be on the other person's field. You can't sell it because of that shibud.
It is on a person's field. It's also in your field. I mean, it's joint. I mean, it's both.
So that's not how they view partnership. They view partnership as being owned by, unless it's this tiny one. So that what I'm explaining is if it's a tiny field, then it is joint. And then you can't take away my rights to my field.
Brera is a legal fiction that although they own the entire field in joint, they're allowing each person to use a piece of it for that time or place.
Correct.
Even though they would otherwise neither one be able to step foot in it, Brera is this legal fiction that wherever I take a step, that piece right now is mine.
Perfectly said. Amar le Rav Yosef. Let's keep going. Second line. Said Rav Yosef, I don't like that at all. Not for the same reason Hanan didn't like it. But what about the case of a Beit Knesset? What about so now this introduces a whole new level, which is publicly owned buildings, right? Not shuftim. But if you have a communal building, the whole community is viewed as owning the Beit Knesset. Everyone may have invested in it. Each person owns it. Of course, you don't say that you can split it up, right? It's not like each one gets their pew when you ultimately sell the Beit Knesset. It's a jointly owned thing. Are Beit Knesset, it's equivalent to where it's too small to split up because there is no ultimate splitting up of Beit Knesset. It's not really owned by the joint people in that way. And we're going to say in the next Mishnah, or it's going to be a few Mishnahs, but I think in the next Mishnah in our Gemara, Tanan shnehem asurim b'davar shel oto ha'ir. If this happens in a city and you're talking about a Beit Knesset or publicly owned property, and Reuven says to Shimon, I don't want you to touch anything that's mine. And Shimon says the same to Reuven, you can't go to Shul. Why can't you go to Shul? According to what you just said, everyone agrees that it's permitted in that case. Ella says Rav Yosef, it's the opposite, Amar Ziri. Machloket she'ein ba kedei chalukah. They only argue if there's no way to split it up. Aval yesh ba kedei chalukah, divrei hakol asur. This is pretty radical, right? That they only argue if it's a tiny little field. And that's where you question Brera or not Brera. But where it's big enough for chalukah, then in fact, everyone seems to hold, I would say, ein Brera in that case, and it's definitely prohibited to go into the field. Again, the Ran toys with whether this is a takana, or whether we really think it's asur, but that's how we would conclude. And Amar Rav Huna halachak Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, V'chein Amar Rav Elazar halachak Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, and they both seem to paskin that the halacha is like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov.
Why did they have to paskin? That's the rule.
Well,
No, it's not.
The Chachamim, the halachas.
But 1 second, the Ran, so the bulk of this Ran on last two Amudim ago is dealing with the problem that he seems to conclude that the halacha is that midoraita ein brera, only midrabanan yesh brera, which is what the Gemara says elsewhere. Again, it's a machloket. And here we're saying like Rav Elazar ben Yaakov that yesh brera. So the Ran goes into it, he brings like 5 different opinions from the Rishonim and Bali Tosfot, and he goes into his own opinion that in fact this is all because of really what Hanan was struggling with, which is that this is more complicated than regular brera because you also have a right as a shutaf to own it. So it's sort of partnership on a higher level. So it's not just we want to know who owns it. It's a second level that basically when you buy something together, you're taking for granted that each one's going to get certain portions in that thing.
Right. True, but it's not a Rishonim rule, but it's a Chazal rule that the halakha is always like Rabbi Yaakov.
Oh, that was your point. Correct. That is true.
Yeah.
We always pass it 100%. Sorry, I thought you meant the Brera part.
No, the Brera, you're right. Brera is very complicated.
Right. Let's do the last part now that we got into a good complicated discussion. The final case we had was Hamudar Nami Chaver Yishlo Sham Merchatz, right? I say I'm never going to get any benefit from Shimon. I'm really angry with him. But then I remember that Shimon owns the pool. And I don't know what to do. Thankfully, Shimon rented it out to a management company. So the question is, can I use the pool? So says the Gemara, the Mishnah said, if Shimon still has a tfisat yad in the pool, then I can't. And if he doesn't, I can. Ask the Gemara, kama tfisat yad. So what does that mean if he still owns a portion? Amar Rav Nachman, meaning if he gets a percentage of the profit. Lemechza 50%, shlish, the revia, a third, his quarter, it doesn't really matter. It could be 2%. But if he's getting a percentage of the gate, then I can't go because I'm basically giving him benefit. I guess I'm saying it's sort of backwards, but it's the other way as well, meaning Shimon can't get benefit from me, so you're not allowed to go as well. You're getting benefit from that.
So if I say you can't come into my house, right? But I sublet my house to somebody else. I'm not there anymore. But he's paying rent to me, so you still can't come in. Is that
correct? Let me finish the Gemara, and then we'll talk about some specific cases if you really want to. Aval, now our Gemara's language is batzir lo. If it's less than that, no. The Ran does not have that girsa. It makes no sense because why would a third, a quarter, why would less than a quarter not consider profit? So he is girsa. There are other girsot, but his girsa aval bibeitza lo. If I'm getting the eggs, then no. What does that mean? So the Ran has his answer. Beitzim is his language. Is in that case that's called tfisat. What are beitzim? So of course, as anyone who might have, I've never owned anything, but if someone did own something, you might open this is my example I thought of today. You might open an optometry store in the front of your BJ's because you want people to come to your store. So it's very possible that your swimming pool makes no money at all, or but you get the concession. So the Ran understands that when people went to the Beit HaMerchatz, of course, they wanted to have a sandwich, right? An egg, I guess. I'm not sure of the egg part. A hard-boiled egg with your schwitz, right? So you made money on the eggs. You didn't make money on the merchatz. You rented out the merchatz to the management company so they can sell it. They can just deal with it, but you're selling the eggs. In that case, you're still getting benefit basically from him using the merchatz. Right?
You brought your own eggs for them to cook in the steam.
In the steam.
I think that's what they used to do in the Schwitz. They would
bring eggs.
They would put eggs there, yeah.
That's okay. I guess that's where it comes from. I'd never heard of that, but
that's an interesting way of cooking egg.
Abaya says, no, I feel of a beitza asur. That's also asur because you're ended up benefiting him. Hey chidami deshari. When is it permitted? Did the kabel bitaska, where he got it bitaska, and again, taska is very, very uncertain what exactly that means. The Ran's understanding is where he gets no portion whatsoever, but you pay him a flat fee. So Shimon owns the merchatz. The management company pays him $10,000 a year, flat fee. It doesn't matter who goes or who doesn't go. Reuven going to that merchatz doesn't benefit Shimon. Shimon doesn't get any benefit from that. Reuven not considered to get benefit from Shimon because it's not something he has any ongoing stake in. He's going to make his 10,000 whether you use it or don't use it, and therefore Reuven's allowed to do it. And the Ran here makes the argument, again, with a lot of opinions. He says Rabbeinu Tam seemed to paskin this way. Maybe, that it's only if you pay the rent before, if you already paid it. So it's $10,000, but you already have to pay the money. But if you don't pay till later, you paid up front, correct? Which is where it gets into Hanan's question about if you rent a house, what happens, right? Did you already pay or not already pay? And the Ran also is of the opinion, again, he brings two opinions here, that it's only if you rented it prior to the netter. Meaning, I made the netter against Shimon, or Shimon made the netter against me, but he had already rented out his bathhouse. But if he hadn't previously rented out the bathhouse and he makes the netter and then rents out the bathhouse, the netter will stay on the bathhouse. So that is some of the details that the Ran adds here. Not yet. Anyways, this is the complicated question. We're going to continue tomorrow with the same, more on the same vein about how you view partners when one makes a netter against the other.
What time tomorrow?
So I'm not sure. We could take a vote. I cannot do 7:30 a.m.
PM.
because I have to take my kid to the airport actually, but I can do many other times in the day. I'm free almost all day. So
7:30. We've been doing 7:30 p.m.
we've been doing 7:30 p.m. Does that work for this? Because I want to do a time that works.
Yeah, fine.
Works for me.
We've been doing it, so let's just keep doing it.
I'm not saying no.
No, I'm saying yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing, I know James doesn't love it because he's gonna miss the football game, but 7:30 p.m. We hope you can join us. We'll try. I know it's not the football game, I'm joking. We'll do 7:30 p.m. I'll put it on the WhatsApp.
No, I missed the football games today.
I didn't know that.
Morocco is in the semifinals.
Yes, very, very European of you. Okay,
You're talking about soccer, Charlie. That's called soccer.
In most of the world, it's called football.
Well, most of the world they use meters, but we're not now. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
I put in the chat that they made, at least Korean, they made eggs putting in like in
Yeah.
the sauna.
Oh, that's-
somehow.
Yeah, we gotta read that. Thank you.
Anyway, that's like that's the one but I think I saw a documentary on Schwitz where I think I remember that there were eggs in there.
That's really fascinating. I'm gonna try to find it.
Yeah.
Okay, Shavua Tov.
Good job.
Bye.
Bye.